Being an immigrant means you will be a stranger wherever you go, with no place to call home. You will be an outsider your whole life. And this is somewhat what the migrants in New York City are feeling right now. Over 150,000 people have come in less than 2 years, plunging the city into a disaster. Approximately 70,000 migrants were squeezed into hundreds of emergency shelters. People slept on floors or huddled on pavements in the December cold last year. Families lived in big tents on the edges of the city, away from schools and other services. And New York City spends hundreds of millions of dollars each month to care for them all. This past year, an official in Mayor Eric Adams' administration referred to the city's responsibilities to house and feed the 500 new migrants who showed up every day as our new normal. The migrant crisis in New York is the result of factors beyond the city's control, such as global unrest, the federal government allowing migrants to enter in record numbers without providing them a legal way to work, and a unique local rule requiring the city to provide a bed for every homeless person. However, the magnitude of the crisis, the $2.4 billion cost thus far, the horrible conditions, and the number of migrants stranded in shelters can also be linked back to acts taken and not taken by the Adams administration. As the city rushed to improve a system that has processed over 150,000 people since 2022, it made several mistakes, many of which had never been reported. During most of the crisis, the city didn't do anything basic to help migrants leave shelters and find housing in a city known for having high costs. It took a year to help a huge number of migrants file for asylum, which essentially shut down thousands of legal job possibilities. The city has no-bid contracts worth more than $2 billion, some of which are with companies that are accused of mistreating migrants. It has paid more than twice as much to house each migrant family as it did to house a family who was homeless before the event. To make things even harder, Mr. Adams, a Democrat who could be rude, seemed to be criticizing federal and state officials who gave him what he wanted. City officials point out that New York has received significantly more migrants than any other major city outside the border states, and that only New York must house them indefinitely. It has honored that requirement more than 99% of the time. While all of us have expertise in serving an aspect of this crisis, none of us are experts in essentially running a refugee system, which is what we are doing, Molly Wasau Park, the mayor's social services commissioner, said in October 2023. Critics argue that the city has made too many unnecessary mistakes. The majority of the migrants are families with children. The city began renting out hotel rooms again. Another issue contributes to the space crunch. The city's process of moving people from shelter to permanent homes has become slower. The average length of stay in a family shelter rose to 534 days in fiscal year 2022 from 443 days in fiscal year 2020. The majority of migrants are ineligible for housing aid programs due to their immigration status, which is aggravating the delay. All of this occurred while the city faced a potential budget crisis. In the days following the crisis, Mr. Adams ordered agencies to reduce city-funded expenses by 3% in 2022. A single adult in a shelter normally costs $135 per day, while a family spends $190 per day, with the bill reaching hundreds of millions of dollars. The city has approached the state and federal governments for assistance. Officials also provided some basic information on the 2 emergency response and relief centers it plans to establish. The first will accommodate 1,000 single adults, mostly men, in 5 long tents set up on a parking lot at Orchard Beach in the Bronx. The city provided a photo of another emergency shelter as an example of the design, which featured dozens of cots lined up in rows. The second center's layout, which will serve families with children, has yet to be confirmed. The city is supposed to provide each family with their own room. Both centers are designed to be temporary rest stops, including dining halls, showers, medical and mental health providers, and legal assistance. The city intends to keep residents at the centers for no longer than 4 days. In May, a reporter questioned Deputy Mayor Ann Williams Isom about how many of the 72,000 refugees who had passed through the shelter system had filed for asylum. "Very few," she replied, adding, "We will be working on that." "Why so few?" the reporter inquired. They probably didn't know where to get connected to services, didn't know who to give their paperwork to, she stated. It was shocking to hear from the City Hall's person in charge of dealing with migrants. Applying for asylum, a complicated, time-consuming process with a one-year deadline, is one of the few options for people who cross the border to work legally. The city has begged the federal government to expedite work authorization. However, for a year, the city did nothing to help migrants find work, eventually launching an asylum help center in late June. If it had moved sooner, state officials said, it is likely that thousands more migrants would be able to work today. Sluggishness was part of a pattern. For the majority of the crisis, the city appeared to disregard pleas to offer additional resources to help migrants move out of shelters faster, a mistake that became more costly over time. A migrant's family's monthly shelter stay costs approximately $12,000. Moving 10,000 families out of shelters would save more than $1 billion annually. However, the city frequently appeared to be so overburdened by the task of finding a bed for everyone each night that it had little time for planning. City Councilwoman Diana Ayala described the procedure as follows: you get here, they put you in a shelter, you stay in a shelter, and a year passes. We are a municipality doing the federal government's job, explained Ingrid Lewis-Martin, the mayor's main advisor. They need to do their jobs. People who had filed for asylum were asked by the Legal Aid Society to have the city apply for public aid. The money would help them find housing. In August, 3 friends chatted outside a jail-turned-shelter in Harlem about the difficult task of finding work and a place to live. One, Gregorio Velasco, 40, was on crutches after crashing his delivery motorbike in the rain. His companion, Obson Brutius, a 29-year-old Haitian, said as they fought to remain hopeful in such dire circumstances. Only after hospital officials established an arrival center in May at the Roosevelt, a faded but once grand midtown hotel, did the city begin more carefully surveying migrants to determine what they needed to become self-sufficient. We're starting to have those conversations now, Dr. Ted Long, who oversees the hospital's migrant response, told the city council in August. Another factor overloading the shelters, unaffected by the migrant crisis, was increased homelessness among existing residents. According to an analysis, the non-migrant population in the main shelter system has increased by 20% under Mr. Adams. Things are so bad now that even leaders of Democratic strongholds like New York City and Massachusetts are giving up, said Kevin McCarthy, the then Speaker of the House. They can't handle the strain that the massive influx of people has had on their city and state. In important House races, Republicans have already made immigration and asylum seekers a major campaign issue, which could hurt migrants. Adams's words will continue to divide our communities. They will create chaos and hate towards immigrants, not just the ones arriving, but also towards immigrants in all of New York City. We cannot have our leaders using the lives of vulnerable people as political pawns, Joseph said. Cities receiving migrants from places like Texas are falling into the Republican trick. Governor Abbott's cruelty is starting to win in Mayor Adams's circle. Instead of fighting those cruelties, he is falling prey to them. Is there a way to resolve this issue that doesn't disadvantage the city or the migrants? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video before you leave.